FM25 is going to be the biggest football manager ever. We already knew that. They announced that it was going to be on the Unity engine. They're adding women to the game, and it's going to be basically a completely different experience than it ever has been before. But we didn't know any of the specifics of what the game looked like and how the redesign was going until they dropped the dev blog yesterday. Of course, they dropped it while I was traveling. I'm now at TwitchCon in Rotterdam, so I'm recording this from my hotel room. But we are going to go through the dev blog and talk about what's in the game and all of the stuff that they removed, because they actually announced that they have taken a lot of stuff out of FM. And there are also major UI changes announced, which opinion seems incredibly split on. So I will do a good job of telling you what to think and how to think. This is Zealand brainwashing. Are you ready? Seriously, I'm excited for this. Development update, Football Manager 25. From Miles Jacobson himself. Then this is not short, dude. This is 2,800 words. It is a 2,800 word dev blog. Hey, the more the better, right? Now, the first bit of it, these couple paragraphs are really just talking about why they're writing the dev blog in the first place, that they believe in something called the right amount of transparency. You can't be over transparent because you want to have cool surprises and stuff, but you want to tell people about what's going on in the game. Basically what it boils down to. That and the fact that they're celebrating getting the Premier League license after apparently chasing it for more than 20 years, which that's cool, but if you use the, packs like logo and face packs, the licensing, it's not going to matter too much for you. But considering the vast majority of people that play Football Manager don't use that stuff, it is a really big deal. They also apparently changed their logo, which I do this, and I had no idea. So it's not a huge logo change. Here's the old one. Here's the new one, right? It's a modern, simplified version of the new logo. They also point out the fact that there are 10 million players of Football Manager now, which is insane. That's a ton of growth, and apparently most of that is not on PC. Now, that does concern me a little bit, right? Because if we're talking about a game that is now much more popular on console, as they point out here, and mobile, then it is a game that's going to need to be designed in order to accommodate for that. Now, there is the bright side that the computer version is slightly different from the console version, is very different from the mobile version, right? So they're not all technically the exact same game, but the fact that the game development in general is going to be focused on a wider audience is definitely going to have an effect on the PC audience. But 10 million players is 10 million players. The more people playing Football Manager, I would think at least for a while, the better. The next segment talks about how the new Football Manager is going to set the tempo for the next 20 years of game development, because they've basically gone in and redesigned and looked at everything. The only real nugget of information from here that is like a huge piece of news is that you will be able to move between men's and women's football within the game seamlessly. So they'll both be integrated. You can coach the U.S. women's national team to a World Cup and then move to Brazil's men's team and coach them to a World Cup win, right? You can do both of those things kind of in the same career. Staff and everything will move fluidly between there's one football ecosystem, basically, which is, the more you think about it, the more that just has to be the way to do it. Obviously, reputation is going to be an interesting thing to handle. Now, Football Manager is always married to the idea of replicating real life, but where are they going to land all of the clubs reputation-wise? Because what you don't want to happen is Pep Guardiola leaving Manchester City to go coach the England women's team, right? You're going to have to balance out the reputations if you want like a realistic simulation. And then there's another section, which also doesn't have a lot of new features, but does at least give more of a window into their thinking. And they bolded this so that it was easy to find. Would we do it the same way if we had our time again? So they've been working on this Football Manager for years. So they just went through every different section of the game and went, would we do it a different way if we had the opportunity now? So there's going to be elements of the game that are completely redesigned. At least that's the way they're making it sound. They also said that they asked the question, would we have done this at all? Which gets to the point that I've read this already, but there is the section where they just talk about things that they've removed from the game. That does exist. Kind of a terrifying thing. But then they specified like some of these things are removed, but they're going to come back later. The way they worded it, do we have the time required to do this at the highest possible standard in our first cycle of a new era? So you remove the thing from the game because you don't think it lives up to the standard, but eventually you're going to add it back into the game because then you feel like it is back up to the standard again. You're able to make it up to the standard again. And the last thing I think is important in here is they at least, maybe they're using it as a crutch, maybe it's true, right? But they at least say that they're using the data from the game, basically analytical data of how we all play the game to motivate their decisions on what to cut and what to focus on. And after all of that prelude, they then hit you with what's changing. So features and modes that aren't in FM25. And the one that jumps right off the screen is touchline shouts. Encourage, praise, demand more, berate. Those are all going to be removed, which the moment I saw this, it makes sense to me. It does, because shouts have never worked the right way. Right, because it's always gone through with every other tactical change, which means if you shout encourage, that encourage shout doesn't reach the field until the next dead ball, right? You can't actually interact with the team at the same time. They've also always bothered me because while in theory shouts are awesome, right? You have this opportunity to influence the mood of your players throughout the game. The majority of them have never worked. They've never been particularly intuitive. It would be really complex to build a system where they were intuitive, but for them to not be intuitive at all, it was kind of like you just had to learn this language that, oh, you encourage in this situation, you demand more in this situation, and you avoid every other button like the plague. They do say, I do really want them to come back, but they'll only reappear if we can do them properly, so it sounds like it's something that's on the back burner, which means we won't be shouting encourage again for years. Pour one out for the shouts. The next thing on the chopping block, the social media screen and the data chalkboard. Now, the social media screen, probably the most useless thing in Football Manager. It was so clearly designed to be like, here's a positive response, here's a neutral response, here's a negative response, right? And the logic being, well, that's how social media is in real life, but it just wasn't something that I never looked at it. So my life is not going to be altered at all by that. The data chalkboard, while a very cool deep track feature in the game, I imagine it took a lot of maintenance. If you don't know what it is, I'm traveling, but the editor's going to pull it up for you. It's this thing where you could see, I talk about it in videos sometimes, you could see really specific, cool data. But it's something that just not a lot of people use, right? I found myself not using it except for very rare situations where you really want to find out one specific piece of information. They say literally that the usage of the chalkboard dropped from 10% to 1% once they introduced the data hub, so it just wasn't worth the time to maintain. And apparently, at least what they're trying to say here is basically all the same information is available, just in other areas in the game. That it's not going to be in that chalkboard area. They've also removed Create a Club. Now, I've never done this, but I know a lot of people had a ton of fun with Create a Club. And this is one that on the surface just makes me kind of sad. Because it's one of those things that while I never did it, I never used it. It was nice to have the option and it seemed fun. But it's only going to be on for a year. Apparently, they've guaranteed here that it'll be back in FM26 with lots of changes and improvements then hopefully more people will play it. It's basically the way that they wrote this. It's 5% of people use the Create a Club feature. So it's going to be back. You just have to wait a year for it to be in the game. They've also removed Versus Mode, which was Football Manager's attempt at this idea of playing against each other. It's actually quite cool. If you never used it, you basically load up your squads from your save, and you can play against your other friend's squad from their saves. A couple other ways to set it up. But only 0.5% of the people that have Football Manager actually played it. As a result, there's no plan to they said they haven't started a redesign on it yet, but at least he seems to think that it might come back at some point. But this seems like they might just remove Versus Mode and never bring it back again, which is sad. But there is an adjustment that is going to bring PvP back. They also removed something called Challenge Mode, which, dude, I play this game for a living. I have no idea really what Challenge Mode is. I don't know if I've ever opened Challenge Mode. They said it's going to be revamped and it'll be back next year or the year after that. So they haven't given up on Challenge Mode. And they're also removing Fantasy Draft. They've just axed every other mode from this. I love Fantasy Draft, but they said it is going to be playable on FM25. And they said something that kind of scares me, but I also kind of like. Mid-cycle feature releases are something that will become more regular for the series. So basically, they don't think Fantasy Draft is ready right now, but they want to add it into FM25, so they're going to add it halfway through the game cycle. But part of this Fantasy Draft announcement takes an absolutely wild turn because I'll just read it. We've therefore decided to partner with FIFA E, FIFA's esports division, on an invitational FIFA E World Cup of Football Manager, which takes place in Liverpool from August 29th to September 1st. Using Football Manager 2024, 24 players will contest the tournament representing their nation on the big stage. Not only a FIFA E World Cup title is on the line, also $100,000 in prize money is up for grabs. So my first thought is, America, brother, get me on that stage, brother, get me on that stage. But outside of representing the United States in a Football Manager World Cup, FM's leaning into the esports thing. They're removing the fantasy draft because they initially envisioned it being an esport, but it wasn't necessarily at that level yet, so they took it down. They're going to revamp it. And in the meantime, they're partnering to create an actual Football Manager World Cup. They called the tournament a test run, which if I'm invited to participate, then y'all try not to beat everybody else too bad so that it makes good television so that they want to do it again. But it's a collaboration to try and jointly realize our esports potential. So this is something that I'm assuming Football Manager has spent a lot of time thinking about and trying to work on, because now you got 10 million people playing FM. Turning it into an esport feels more and more viable to them. But I've always thought that Football Manager as an esport is difficult. It's like professional poker. You can do everything right and lose, and do everything wrong and still win. Now, there is professional poker, though, so the idea of bringing Fantasy Draft back is awesome, and they kind of have to bring it back because they said the first qualifiers on the road to the next World Cup of Football Manager will be in Fantasy Draft. Which means when Fantasy Draft comes back, if all things go well, you'll be able to qualify for the World Cup of Football Manager through the Fantasy Draft mode in the game. That's objectively awesome. That's the bad, all of this is beyond cool. Every other part of this so far, take it or leave it. This is really cool. But that's more just a hype announcement packed into the middle of this. Then they go into the new UI. They have completely changed the UI at FM. Now, some of the stuff in their introduction to the new UI is good. They researched it for years, studied how people played the game, from really experienced players to new players, to see how they interacted with the screens. They also say that they want it to be a design that is platform agnostic, which means they're thinking about it in a way where if you're on console, it's easy to use. If you're on computer, it's easy to use. That does kind of scare me a little bit, right? Because now we have the Football Manager has always been this game that you played until 3 a.m. on an overheating computer by yourself. And now that is kind of being opened, they're opening the curtains and letting the sunlight of the console world in, right, to participate in this game now. So if they do it right, it'll be fine. But, you be the judge. And the first thing they introduce is terminology, something called tiles and cards. So these are tiles. Basically, this is a tile representing form in the last 5 matches. But depending on how the UI is set up or where you are in the game, the last 5 matches can be as small as something in the top right or as detailed as the bottom one, right? So these tiles are moddable in size, basically, but they can kind of fit anywhere on where the UI is. And as you can imagine, if you're on console and you're just flicking around with the joystick, it's a lot easier to go between a bunch of tiles that look like this than have to hover over something and click on it, right? It seems like that's what they're trying to avoid. They're trying to segment the information better. But if you click on the tile, no matter what the size, then you go to the card, which presents you with the most detailed overlay of information, which this would be the card for the tile that we were just looking at. You can see kind of the exact thing they did in the last 5 matches, overall season stats, whatever else is deemed important. They've also done something incredibly radical. They've removed the inbox from the game. There is no inbox anymore. And this is basically the image we get of something they're calling the portal. And so let's just take a look at everything that we can see here. On the left, you have an agenda, right? And that seems to organize the sorts of things that come into the inbox as you have to do them. Attend the press conference, confirm the match squad, attend the match. On the middle, we've got a calendar. But on the calendar, you can see different emblems for training. You can see 2 weeks in advance. So I guess that saves you from having to kind of click up in the top right to see when your next match is and everything. You've got fixtures, which I'm assuming are just fixtures, in your league or whatever. And then you have a news section. So instead of it just randomly landing on the news or social media screen when you get out of a continue, you're just getting news updates like Kylian Mbappe to Real Madrid in that bottom left part. And then over here on the right, we have messages, right? These are kind of hidden by this work in progress thing that they put over here. But if I'm reading this right, it's from the owner. Messages looks like it is just a catch-all for the stuff that was coming into your inbox before. You're just getting them in text messages now. So they've just modernized that and modernized the look and feel of it. The search bar at the top says search for tiles. which are those other things. So you can technically search for, I'm assuming, any tile in the game, right? If you want last 5 matches, Kylian Mbappe, you might just be able to type that into the search bar and find it. And then there's different areas, like there's squad, recruitment, on the pitch, club, and profile. We don't get a look at any of those, right? This is the first dev blog look into the game. They're very, very clear about the fact that it's a work in progress and everything. So this is what we get. And I'll be honest, I've seen some people hating on this. I don't hate it. I don't know if we know enough about it to hate it in the first place, right? We have one image of this. On the surface, I don't hate the idea of getting rid of the inbox, right? As long as I have, ways to get that information. I think the idea of splitting up that information between the agenda, right, and the messages, at least that breaks apart some of that information and it makes it work. I'm sure the messages are going to become hilariously canned, right? You're just going to get the same messages over and over and over again. Probably going to get a text from your scout that's like, hey, boss, I have 47 scouting reports. You want me to send them over? But just like in some weird way. But no, I don't hate this. I think that it feels a little more clean. And to be perfectly honest, it feels more like an actual game and less like Spreadsheet Simulator. Now, don't get me wrong. I love Spreadsheet Simulator, right? And I hope they haven't touched a lot of the elements of Spreadsheet Simulator that are awesome, right? Like attributes, hopefully, or we don't see a player page in this dev blog. Hopefully all that stuff is kind of the same way. But this in itself, it feels like a better way to present information than just the inbox, right? This is a much more varied and colorful and not colorful doesn't really matter, but it is, right? In kind of an engaging way to present the same information that you would have been getting through your inbox and information that you would have wanted. And clearly with the bottom stuff, particularly the news, they're always invested in making sure that you know what's going on in the rest of the world in FM, because I always found that to be one of the coolest parts anyways. But seriously, this in itself, I don't hate. I would love to see all of the other stuff, but we're only going to get a look at that in due time, right? But they do show us one more screen. Now, this screen is during the match. There's one thing about this I hate. I can't see the field behind the screen. I wish I could see the field behind the screen. It just makes me feel more like I'm in a match, right? The tablet sort of thing made me feel more like I was in a match. It felt more realistic. I would say on stream, like, oh, yo, bring me the tablet, right? I need to take a look at something. But there is a cool part of this. It looks like you're going to be able to watch the game in a super fast speed in 2D in between highlights. Look in this middle here. There's the pitch thing. It looks like you're going to be able to see the ball kind of go back and forth. That is going to be huge for managing. You're going to be able to see like, oh, when we're coming forward, it's always this combination of passes. Even if it's going, at warp speed, you're going to say, oh, we seem to end up with the ball over here. Oh, this guy's always losing the ball, right? You'll be able to see a lot more information because you're watching the match at warp speed with your own eyes, right? That if that's what I think it is, I don't know, right? They don't really specify. But if that's what I think it is, that's really cool. That is really, really cool. And then just like that, the dev blog is over. They tell you that the release date's going to be confirmed in early September and that they're going to be bringing back the official Football Manager podcast. And that's it. So my initial reaction, I'm most worried about the fact that we got nothing about the match engine. We didn't get any in-match gameplay images. Because I feel like if we're switching to Unity here, I say the royal we is in all 10 million of us, right? If we're switching to Unity here, I would be really, really happy to whet the palate of everybody and get everybody super fired up by showing one image from like in-game play where the graphics just look insane. But we didn't get that, right? I feel like that was a marketing slam dunk. I feel like that was an obvious choice. And I am very curious. I'm racking my brain to try and think of a reason where if things were going well when it comes to the match engine, you would want to do that. Right, and maybe you guys can think of one, but I can't necessarily. Now, they have until they're going to announce the release date in early September. And the match engine is going to look better. It's in Unity. It's impossible for it visually to not at least look better. But maybe they just wanted to do this dev blog and really focus on the UI so they could see how people responded to it. And I think the UI, the people hating on it, I don't necessarily understand. I think the UI looks pretty good. I am most concerned about the idea of trying to change it too much in order to accommodate people that play on console, just because I am PC till I die. But the presentation of information looked pretty clean. Getting rid of the inbox isn't necessarily a bad idea. And we got like 3 or 4 screenshots. I mean, we can't pass judgment on whether the UI is actually good or not with the information that we have right now. But I don't think they're headed in a bad direction. And then there's a Football Manager World Cup, which I want to play. I want to play in that thing. so bad. That sounds so freaking cool. If I actually do get to play in the Football Manager World Cup, I'm expecting a lot of you guys to show up in Liverpool dressed like George Washington crossing the Delaware, and United States is bringing it home. Bring it home. Should probably dress like Ted Lasso for that. I feel like that would go well. I'll grow out the mustache even more. But you know the best part out of all of this? We have now entered the new Football Manager information cycle. Let the games begin. If you want to watch me do a World Cup made up of 32 teams, made up of 11 of the same player, like 11 Mbappes or 11 Erling Haalands, the video's right there. It's an absolute blast, and the final is a scorcher of a match. Had a great time making it. I'm going to go take a nap on my hotel bed.